Good morning. It is amazing to be here today. I'm glad we all could be here. I'm going to just go ahead and jump right in. Today we are going to be talking about the Tomb of the Kings. Now, um, who here is caught up on their Bible reading? Who's within a week of being caught up on? There we go. All right. That's fine. I mean, uh, just keep on going. But even a week behind, you may have seen in some of the stories some mentions of when a king dies, them being buried with their ancestors. And for some of them, it specifically says Tomb of the Kings. Now, that sounds pretty self-explanatory. And that is because it is self-explanatory. It is the tomb for the kings. There's some things that I think we should take a closer look at with this. So, most of the kings of Judah were buried in the Tomb of the Kings, but not all. If we go all the way back to 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 10, we see, "Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David." So he's buried with his ancestors, and this starts the whole Tomb of the Kings. It doesn't specifically say it, but knowing how the burials worked in this time, you were buried with your ancestors. You had an ancestral burial tomb. And it was very important in this time for people to be buried with their family. If you remember in 1 Kings 13, you have this man of God from Judah. He comes, he prophesies, and then this other prophet of God tries to entice him to come eat with him, even though God told him not to. The man of God goes and eats, and his punishment, it says, is in verse 20. It says, "While they were sitting at the table, the word of the Lord came to the old prophet who had brought him back. He cried out to the man of God who had come from Judah. 'This is what the Lord says. You have defied the word of the Lord and have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. You came back and ate bread and drank water in the place where he told you not to eat or drink. Therefore, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your ancestors.'" Now, me personally, I'm thinking, does this really matter? I mean, big deal. Yes, buried with family, okay, but that's the best punishment? You're dead. But this was something that was very, very important for them at this time. And he defied God. He was not going to be buried with them. We see for Solomon in 1 Kings 11, verse 43, it says that he's being buried with his ancestors. And then if we look in 2 Chronicles 16, Asa, verse 14, it says, "They buried him in the tomb that he had cut out for himself in the city of David. They laid him on a bier covered with spices and various blends of perfumes, and they made a huge fire in his honor." So, don't know if this means that he was buried with his ancestors. He cut it out. He was king. He was righteous. He did good in the sight of the Lord. So, maybe he moved the tomb of David and Solomon into there. We don't know exactly. But he had this tomb cut out for himself. And the Kings, it doesn't mention that he had the tomb built for himself. But what I want to do today is I want to look at a few examples of kings where it specifically says that they were not buried in the tomb of the kings. First, we're going to look at the story of Jehoram. Now, a little bit of background. If we look in 2 Chronicles chapter 18, beginning in verse 1, Now Jehoshaphat had great wealth and honor, and he allied himself with Ahab by marriage. All right, so already starting off with some problems there. If you know anything about Ahab, you do not want to be aligned with them. But he did this. And it says that Jehoshaphat married through Ahab his son Jehoram. In 2 Kings 8, verse 18, it says married Ahab's daughter. Now, it goes on to say in 2 Chronicles 21, verses 4 through 6, if we look at that, when Jehoram established himself firmly over his father's kingdom, he put all his brothers to the sword along with some of the officials of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, if you've been keeping up even vaguely, you should know kings of Israel. Were there any good kings? Now, aligning yourself with the kings of Israel is already a bad sign. It says that he put all his brothers to the sword, so he kills all of his family to try to enshrine his rule and make it to where he can't be opposed. And this influence that he's having, or that he's receiving from kings of Israel and Ahab's daughters and all that, is corrupting him. If we look at Jehoram, going on in verse 7, nevertheless, because of the covenant the Lord had made with David, the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David. He had promised to maintain a lamp for him and his descendants forever. So, for it to point this out, Jehoram was evil. He was terrible. But God made a covenant, made a promise with David, and no matter how bad Jehoram was, God was not going to break this covenant right now. If we skip down to verse 18. After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels. In the course of time, at the end of the 2nd year, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great pain. His people made no funeral fire in his honor as they had for his predecessors. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He passed away to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tomb of the kings. So there's a lot to unpack here. So evil, he had this disease that afflicted him for 2 years, and we're told during this time that he was in pain, excruciating pain for the entire time. But let's not gloss over this. After he died, his people made no funeral fire in his honor as they had for his predecessors. That's a big deal. Because we've seen during this time, there have been good kings, there have been evil kings. Every single one basically has had this funeral fire, some kind of celebration. Jehoram was so bad that the people did not care enough to even just start a fire for him. And then going on in verse 20, it says, he passed away to no one's regret. Honestly, it's kind of funny. I find it a little humorous for the Bible to specifically call you out and say, yeah, no one really cared that he died. They were kind of happy. He did horrible things. He was a horrible king, and no one missed him. Now, going on after that, you have Ahaziah. This is just more background. So after all this, and after Jehoram was not buried in the tomb of the kings. Kingship goes to Ahaziah, Jehoram's son. He's only there for a year. He was killed. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, after this, after Ahaziah died, Athaliah, who was Ahaziah's mother, killed all of her grandchildren, all the royal heirs, wiped them out. She was furious that Ahaziah died and lost the throne, and she wanted the throne for herself. So Athaliah becomes queen, takes the throne at this point. If we look, beginning in 2 Chronicles 22, verse 10, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of the house of Judah. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered, and put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Because Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram and wife of the priest Jehoiada, was Ahaziah's sister, she hid the child from Athaliah so she could not kill him. He remained hidden with them in the temple of God for 6 years while Athaliah ruled the land. So we have Jehoshaphat saving this child, the descendant, soon to be king, from Athaliah, who's going on this murder spree to retain power. And this is an interesting story coming up, because you would think Tomb of the Kings just for kings, but if we read on, something happens. So, in chapter 23, Jehoiada, after 6 years, it says, on the 7th year, he showed his strength, made a covenant with the commanders of the units of hundreds. They went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites and the heads of the Israelite families from all the towns. When they came to Jerusalem, the whole assembly made a covenant with the king at the temple of God. Jehoiada said to them, the king's son shall reign as the Lord promised concerning the descendants of David. Jehoiada tells them what to do. The Levites and the men of Judah did what he said. And then verse 11, Jehoiada and his sons brought out the king's son and put a crown on him. They presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him and shouted, long live the king. Athaliah heard the noise. She runs there, and she is furious. But it doesn't matter, because then she is killed. Her reign is now over, and Joash is assuming the throne. Jehoiada, and as soon as this happens, in verse 16, Jehoiada then made a covenant that he, the people, and the king would be the Lord's people. All the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Then Jehoiada placed the oversight of the temple of the Lord in the hands of the Levitical priests, to whom David had made assignments in the temple, to present the burnt offerings of the Lord as written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and singing as David had ordered. So, he does this. As we see, first Jehoiada and his wife are guarding Joash for 6 years, protecting them so that way he's not killed. But then we see the very first thing that he does when trying to put Joash on the throne. What does he do? Well, he talks to the commanders. He makes a covenant with them. And then he also gathered the Levites and the head of the Israelites' families from the towns. He goes to the Levites, the priests, and he gets them. And then as soon as Athaliah is dead, he doesn't go to the palace. He doesn't do this. He makes a covenant with the people that they're going to be the Lord's people now. That is his first step. Then, after that, they go get rid of Baal. They get rid of the temple of Baal. They tear it down. They purge Judah of any influence of Baal, because he knew that that was more important than whoever had the throne and taking power immediately. He had to get rid of that. And then all the altars, all the idols, get rid of that. Put the Levitical priests in charge of the temple where they're supposed to be, where David had them, because he knew that was more important. That was the most important thing, and he was going to get things started off right. Then, and we see the influence that Jehoiada had here. Joash, from 7 years old, beginning in in chapter 24, he repairs the temple, and he was only 7 years old when he became king. So he needed guidance, and Jehoiada did so much for him. It says in verse 2, Joash did what was right in the Lord, or in the eyes of the Lord, all the years of Jehoiada the priest. So as long as Jehoiada was around, he did right. And if we look in verse 15 of 2 Chronicles 24, now Jehoiada was old and full of years, and he died at the age of 130. He was buried with the kings in the city of David because of the good he had done in Israel for God and his temple. That is an immense honor for Jehoiada, and showing what he did. Because not only is he buried with the kings in the tomb of the kings, but thinking about it, this is also basically David's tomb, the family of David, that ancestral family. He got buried with them. That is an immense honor for him. And it shows the good that he did. And we see so much that he did. And then sadly, immediately after, we see what happens. Getting in verse 17, after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. Because of their guilt, God came over Judah and Jerusalem. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. So we see an immediate shift. Joash, he listens to other people. He listens to the wrong influences and immediately turns away from them. And even though God is sending prophets and people to speak out about this and try to get them on the right track, he is just refusing to listen. It's incredibly sad how far and how fast Joash fell. And it's also kind of ironic that Joash was probably the one with the authority to put Jehoiada in the tomb of the kings. And he was still righteous at this time. So he saw the honor that was necessary for this and honored Jehoiada by doing this. And then immediately after this, falls away. And then we see the wickedness of Joash. And if we look at 2 Chronicles 24, verse 25, just to show how far Joash had fallen. When the Arameans withdrew, they left Joash severely wounded. His officials conspired against him for murdering the son of Jehoiada the priest, and they killed him in his bed. So he died and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tomb of the kings. Everything was going right for him when Jehoiada was alive, and then he fell so far that he couldn't be buried in the tomb of the kings. And the thing is, I do want to point out, there are instances of evil kings where it says at the beginning, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. It still ended up in the tomb of the kings. So it's not just you had to be considered a good king. There were evil kings that fell, that went into the tomb of the kings. Basically, not being in the tomb of the kings was reserved for select few that were truly terrible. And Joash was one of those, even though he started off so good. If we look at the story, 2 Chronicles 24, verse 20. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper because you have forsaken the Lord. He has forsaken you." They plotted against him, and by order of the king they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." I can't imagine Joash being able to forget all the good that Jehoiada did for him. Kept him alive. He is the only reason that not only is he king, but he's alive. Without Jehoiada, he would be dead as an infant. And then you have years of guidance by Jehoiada. It doesn't say exactly how long, but we know it had to go on for a while. And then somehow being able to forget all that good that was done to you by Jehoiada, falling away, and then being able to kill his son is, I don't know. How could you forget this? He was pulled away by these corrupt influences, and he let it consume him. Then any challenge by somebody, his first thought was, might as well get rid of him. Might as well kill him. And we see how it ended up with him. He was not buried in the tomb of the kings. I want to look at one last example. We have not gotten to this in the Bible reading, so this will be new for everyone. We're going to look at chapter 28 of 2 Chronicles. This is talking about Ahaz. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel and also made idols for worshiping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incenses in the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. Terrible start, right? Somehow it gets worse. And that's not an exaggeration, because if we go down to verse 22, in his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. Now that, I don't know how exactly you can become more unfaithful. You started off at, 0%, and somehow you went negative. But let's see what happened. Going back one verse to 21. Ahaz took some of the things from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace and from the officials and presented them to the king of Assyria. That did not help him. What did he take from the temple? We don't really know. But does anything from the temple need to come out? Then verse 22, became more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus who had defeated him, for he thought, since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them so they will help me. But they were his downfall and the downfall of Israel. Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. So that's how he became even more unfaithful. Ransacking the temple to try to appease the king of Assyria. Then when that doesn't work, okay, well, let me just worship the gods of Damascus because, they beat me, so obviously their gods are more powerful. It's definitely not that I've done all this wickedness and just haven't even cared for my God. And then in verse 24, Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars in every street corner in Jerusalem. That is amazing. Taking things from the temple, God's holy place, and cutting them up. So yeah, I can see how he somehow became more unfaithful to the Lord. Because apparently the temple was still standing and still had furnishings in it during his first 15 years. And then right at the end, he does this. And then we see in verse 27, Ahaz rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of Jerusalem, but he was not placed in the tombs of the kings of Israel. Yeah, I don't think he deserved it to be buried there. So, what can you get from this? Well, in a world of Jehoram's, Joash's, and Ahaz's, be like Jehoiada. He did good enough that the high priest was buried with the kings. We have multiple examples of kings that did so much evil. They were even worse than evil kings that got into the tomb of kings. They were not even worthy of that. We see from this the influence that others can have on them. Even when you're a powerful king, others can influence you in terrifying ways. And with Joash, we see it just almost instantaneously once Jehoiada was dead. Just complete abandonment. It was the only thing keeping him on the straight line, and it's sad. But there are good people out there, and we can be one of those. We can have a positive influence. We can do good works. Now, we're not going to have some tomb of the kings, but honestly, something much, much better. Kingdom of heaven. So, I hope that this was at least interesting. I know when I was reading it and kept seeing Tomb of the Kings, I thought, all right, what is the deal with this? And I wanted to share that with y'all. So thank you, and stand while we sing.